Now, we would like to introduce Mr. Peter Sidoko, University Librarian, the University of Hong Kong. Mr. Peter Sidoko will chair the afternoon session titled Cooperative Staff Development, Benefits, Pitfalls, and Best Practice. Mr. Sidoko.
欢迎各位出席下午的会议。现在有请香港大学图书馆馆长苏德义先生主持第二个主题：合作性的馆员培训、优点、陷阱和最佳典范。有请苏先生。
Thank you. Thank you so much. This is a very interesting session, I think, because we're all saying that staff are our greatest asset. So this afternoon will certainly put the proof of that into the presentations, I hope. So I think it's a very exciting session for us to be witnessing after a really nice lunch. Our first speaker is in fact our keynote for the afternoon, and it is Antony Loveland. He is the Senior Librarian for Africa, Oceania and the Americas at the British Museum. Antony has worked in academic libraries since 1999. He's been involved with CPD 25 since 2003 when he became a member of the Career Development Task Group, which designed events aimed primarily at new professionals. In August 2011, he took over as the chair and as such is responsible for an annual program of over 50 different visits. So the title of his presentation is, as you can see, Cooperative Staff Development, Benefits, Pitfalls and Best Practices, a case study of 10 years of CPD 25. Now you're asking, what is CPD 25? Sit back and listen. Here's Antony.
Thank you, Peter. And before I begin, I would just like to express my thanks to Dr. Story and Louise for inviting me to come and speak today, all the way from the UK, and for the conference team who've been looking after me so well and making this experience a fabulous one. So thank you very much. Right, CPD 25, what's it all about? Before I begin on looking at the detail of CPD 25, I just wanted to say a little bit about the wider context in which CPD 25 operates. So, I think importantly, to start with, it's not a standalone entity. Dr. Butler was talking about the proliferation of library consortia in the UK. Well, here's another one for you. CPD 25 is actually part of a large regional consortium called the M25 Consortium of Academic Libraries. It was formed in 1993, and it had an original core membership of 29 member institutions, which were all exclusively higher education institutions. But in 2002, membership was opened up. So that libraries which were not necessarily affiliated to a university specifically, but had collections which were which had a significant academic research element, could apply to join. Now, this is a move which has seen the consortium undergo significant expansion. It now boasts almost 60 member institutions across the wider southeastern corner of the United Kingdom. So the range of institutions is particularly impressive. It goes from really large research-intensive universities such as University College London and Imperial College London. It includes specialist performing arts conservatoires. It also includes things like a number of our major museums, including my new employer, the British Museum. If you're wondering what the M25 stands for, it's not some super secret government department or anything sexy like that. It's actually a 117-mile long motorway or freeway, which encircles London and is synonymous with terrifying driving and traffic jams. There's even a song called Road to Hell about it. Now, the consortium offers three principal services to its members. One is reciprocal access through a shared access scheme. Another is shared resource discovery through something called Search 25, which is effectively a union catalogue. And staff development via CPD 25. Oh, sorry. It also runs an increasingly successful annual conference and is presently developing initiatives around customer services, and is considering options for consortial-based acquisition, particularly around e-books. Now, Dr. Butler earlier had lots of lovely pictures of her member institutions on the screen. I've got the M25 in all its glory. Here it is on one of its rather frequent bad days, I'm afraid. And when you look at that, you do wonder sometimes whether we could have chosen a more positive association, but there you go. So, CPD 25, just a bit about its history. It wasn't formed at the same time as the consortium. It came along in 2002. And it was the result of a merger between two existing groups. One was the M25 Staff Development Group, and the other was the London University Staff Training Group. Its first chair was Dr. Genio of King's College London, who was an assistant director there, I think. And as you can see from the slide, it's got three main aims. One is to provide staff development and training for all levels of library staff, right from new entrants up to director level, to provide value for money services for all consortium libraries, and to foster good practice amongst members and facilitate the exchange of experience. Now, before I get into the detail of how CPD is actually set up and operates, I would like to emphasise one important point which will inform the rest of the presentation. And that is that, in essence, CPD 25 is very simple. In fact, it's a lot more simple than you might expect. But I would say that far from being a weakness, it really is a strength of the consortium, the organisation, and is a fundamental key to its success. So in terms of its structure, it comprises 4 task groups. That was recently 5, but we've recently reorganised them and folded one of the task groups into operations management, which I'll talk about shortly. They each have a specific name, as you can see, and they each have a specific remit. And I'll say a little bit about each one. But together, they deliver something like 50 separate events and visits a year, and that's an average figure. Some years it's more than that, but it never really dips below 50. So it's quite extensive. So if you look at the first of those 4 task groups, career development, which I was a member of for 10 years, as Peter mentioned, it has a very definite focus on new and early career professionals, along with responsibility for staff development officers or people in an organisation who may have some kind of responsibility for delivering training within their institution. Now, a big part of the group's programme comprises the Professional Qualifications Workshop series. And this is a series of 10 two-hour workshops that run across the year, and they're aimed at people undertaking portfolio-based qualifications offered by the UK's Chartered Institute of Library and Information Professionals. That's our professional body. Each workshop offers an overview of some of the most fundamental topics relating to the management of library and information services, such as copyright, collection management, marketing, supervisory skills and strategic management. They also run 2 events each year geared towards specific issues relating to the management of staff development. So a recent one, for example, was how to manage and integrate training of evening and weekend teams into the overall structure of an organisation. TG2, Quality Standards and Legal Frameworks, now this is undoubtedly the most technically focused of the groups. So whilst it tends to concentrate on legal aspects of library and information work, it's recently been running a number of events on supporting library users with a variety of disabilities. Now this is partly in response to legislative changes in the UK, which has seen institutions have to take a much more proactive role in catering for disabilities of all kinds. So we've been looking at things like dyslexia, deafness, through to dealing with students with complex mental health problems, for example. It's also looking more and more at library technologies, and has recently run an event on migrating library management systems, and I think that's something that the group will do more and more of. TG3, Operations Management. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this is now the amalgamation of two separate groups. It now includes the remnants of what was the 5th task group. And it has the widest remit of all the groups, since it covers most aspects of operational delivery and service management of a library and information service. And it has the largest group membership too. Now, it's partly a reflection of that very wide remit that the group has. And to illustrate the point, I thought I'd give just a few examples of the events, a couple of the events that it's run in the last couple of years. So we have things, so we have things such as space planning, obtaining feedback. We look at working practices, and it's also looked at things like managing the learning environment. So it's quite a broad range of topics that one covers. TG4, personal effectiveness, that really covers those transferable skills, which in combination with the professional skills are crucial to any successful career. And I'm going to list some of them on the slide here. So we've got employability, time management, emotional intelligence, assertiveness, life coaching. The bottom two, I thought I'd talk about these a little bit. Let me just see. Yeah, the moving into management and moving beyond management courses are 3 separate programs, which, well, they're complementary programs actually, and they comprise 3 separate sessions each. And what they really do is equip participants with the skills that will help them to develop beyond their current level and move on to the next stage of their career. So whilst they don't lead to any kind of formal qualification, they are very popular, they are very heavily subscribed to, and are a prominent feature of the overall program, and they run every single year. So that's the 4 task groups. Now, how are the task groups made up? What do they look like? Well, each group's comprised of a chair and a number of committee members. Now, whilst there's some variation in group size, most of them have on average about 6 to 8 members in the group. And although chairs are expected to hold positions of relative seniority within their organisation, the other members can and often do come from a variety of roles within and backgrounds. The only real stipulation is that they do work for a member institution. And also that they are clear about the commitment which is involved, which is expected of any task group member, and this is important. Clear about what that commitment actually is. There is a job description for the role of task group member, which can be found on the CPD25 website, and is, I think, in the actual paper. I'm not going to include it here because it takes ages to go through. So, as I said, average size 6 members, various levels of seniority, must be from member institution. So if you go back to the structure slide for a moment. Now, administrative support, you can see the CPD25 administrator there, administrative support is provided to all of the groups by the CPD25 administrator. And the administrator forms part of the M25 support team, which is a group of 3 people which support the overall work of the consortium. And we fund all of that through levying annual subscriptions on the consortium members. Now, the individual task group chairs collectively form the steering group, which you can see there in the chart. And that's overseen by the CPD25 chair. And in turn, the CPD25 chair has a permanent position on the M25 consortium steering group. So that gives that person a position to an ability to report on CPD25 activity to the M25 steering group and to represent CPD25's interests in the life of the wider life of the consortium. The chair is also one of the consortium's 4 executive officers, along with the consortium chair, the treasurer and the secretary. So, how does it work? Oh, my text is gone. Right. The planning cycle for the annual programme begins in late May or early June, and in fact our next one is next week. And this begins with the planning day. Now, the time of year that we run this is simply a reflection of the fact that the UK's academic calendar tends to run from September, October time through to June or July. So planning has to begin at least a couple of months before that, hence the May or June timing. Over the years, the format for the planning day has changed slightly, but the basic premise has stayed the same, and that's to bring all the task group members together to collectively identify and discuss potential themes for the forthcoming year. Now, at this stage, themes and ideas are just that, really. They're quite abstract, and they're yet to be crystallised and turned into proposals for concrete events. And this is what really happens after the planning day has taken place. And it's at this stage, really, that the hard work takes place and all the detail takes place. And after the planning day, the task groups then arrange to meet amongst themselves separately. And here, practice can vary. So all task groups will meet at least once or twice a year, on average, I would say, but there can be more than that. There can be series of ad hoc meetings. They can do lots of things by email. It depends on how the task group wishes and chooses to work and what suits it best. But the idea of meeting as a task group is primarily to decide on who will take responsibility for organising their event commitments, and also just to monitor subsequent progress to see that they are actually being organised and taking place and things are getting done. Now, unless it's a small visit or a very small event of a couple of hours, for example, most events will be organised by a combination of task group members, and this is very deliberate. It can depend on the composition of the group, obviously, and who's in it. But task group chairs will often use this as an opportunity to pair up more experienced and less experienced group members, and there's a very definite reason for that. For those who are new to a group, they could even be new to the profession as a whole. So the prospect of contacting speakers, particularly at director level or the associate director level, could be quite daunting for someone who's brand new. So they often require the support and encouragement of their co-organiser to help them with this and to encourage them to get in touch and not to be afraid to do so, basically. Once speakers have been secured, then it becomes a matter, I'm sure, that the conference team have gone through in the past few months, finalising dates, finalising venues, finalising a price, and finally marketing the event itself. All this is undertaken in close liaison with the administrator, who provides that absolutely crucial logistical support. Without it, it couldn't happen. And in many ways, that administrator is the catalyst for the entire programme. Now, throughout the year, the steering group, the CPD 25 steering group, meets at least 3 to 4 times. And for each steering group meeting, task group chairs will provide progress reports on their individual group's programme to the CPD 25 chair, and that's normally in advance of the meeting itself. Now, that allows for that important strategic overview of the programme and its development. But what it also does is it allows the steering group to get together to identify potential clashes of ideas, which can sometimes occur, and to flag up any other issues that they may be experiencing with their particular group. So it doesn't look much, but that is essentially how it works. And as I said at the beginning of the slide, it paints a picture of a setup which is quite simple, but it is that light touch approach which really underpins CPD 25's productivity and ultimately its success. Now, benefits. A major advantage is that it's not institution specific, and by that I mean we don't go out to each individual member institution of the consortium and ask them what their staff development priorities are for the forthcoming year. It would just take too much time. But what that does mean is that the programme isn't necessarily dominated by the needs of any individual member institution. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that the programme isn't plugged into institutional needs. We're not totally ignorant of them. Now, how we do this is through the task group structure, really. One of its inherent strengths is that it draws its participants from as wider variety of the group's membership as is possible to do so. So as many of the member institutions are represented within the task group structure as we can possibly manage. Now what that means is it brings a significant amount of collective intelligence to CPD 25's task group structure. So for example, a task group member may have recently been to a training event at their own institution which they found incredibly useful and they feel should be run for the wider benefit of the consortium. Another example may be that their institution has been looking for training events on a specific topic and has identified them, but doesn't necessarily have the resources to deliver such training itself. It's economies of scale, basically. Or it might be that an institution is developing a new service which a task group member feels would make a really good piece of knowledge exchange or a really good showcase event, and is an opportunity for the institution to kind of show itself off. So with that kind of collective knowledge, we can be pretty confident that the program remains relevant to current trends and needs. Another one here is obviously scale. It's just the economies of scale that we can deliver. As I said, going back to this thing about institutions may not be able to necessarily deliver things themselves. CPD 25, by bringing its administrator and its task group structure to bear, can really develop and deliver events on a much bigger scale. And obviously it's cost effective. Now, best practice. Whilst we're confident of the quality of all of our events, we do want to guard against complacency. So what we do is we obtain feedback from every single event that we run. So every delegate at every event is provided with a feedback sheet, and we encourage them to fill it in and respond. Responses then are collated by the administrator, and they are circulated to the organiser and the relevant task group chair for analysis and further discussion. Feedback is obviously taken seriously, and comments from participants can often be the catalyst for changes or improvements to the programme. And again, this is another way of keeping the overall programme fresh and attractive and relevant to current needs. And the events are often obviously marketed via a number of communication channels, all of them electronic actually. The primary marketing tool remains the CPD 25 website, and feedback suggests that that's where people find out about most of our events. The site itself includes details not just of the existing programme and the forthcoming programme, but it also contains a pretty extensive events archive going back to about 2005. Now this is really useful. It acts as a useful reference tool not just for potential delegates to see what's coming up, but it also is useful for task group members who want to jog their memories and make sure that we're not running an event that's been run in the recent past or doesn't clash. Additionally, events are advertised by a number of well-known and well-established email lists in the UK, so they have a national reach. And in 2011 we started a Twitter feed. Now, the Twitter feed is not just a novelty, it's not our token gesture to social media. It's seen as a really important means of overcoming some of the potential deficiencies in some of the more traditional email communication methods. So we have enough evidence, anecdotal evidence, to suggest that sometimes emails don't get cascaded down through an organisation. What the Twitter feed allows individuals to do is sign up to that and find out about events just in case they don't find out about them through the more established email channels. So we kind of overcome the vagaries of various internal communication processes, basically. And don't be afraid to repeat events. Tends to be a lot of anxiety about, within the task groups, about the business of repeating events. Sometimes we feel that we should be offering something fresh and new every single time, and that we should never run one event in following years. But I think that kind of misses the point, and if an event's of good quality, there are some things which there's just an almost constant demand for year upon year upon year, such as management, copyright, data protection, legal aspects of information work. They're all things which you could probably never run enough events for. So we commit to repeating certain events if we think there's merit in it, and we certainly don't think that we should run scared of that. Also, I guess the flip side of that, don't be afraid to drop or postpone an event. We've had instances in the past where we simply haven't, all the indications are we won't get enough delegates to make the event viable financially. So we've either taken the decision to postpone something and try and run this at a later date with maybe some fresh advertising or marketing, or we have taken the decision on rare occasions to drop an event in the interests of being financially viable and just not wanting to run something which is going to have 4 people in the room talking to themselves. So, pitfalls. This is probably going to sound pretty arrogant, I know, but I did struggle to think of any real pitfalls. And I think this is partly because CPD 25 is an organisation whose history has been defined by pretty much consistent success. Now, there's not necessarily a single identifiable reason for that, I have to say, but I think it is possible to identify a number of factors which have been central to that success. And I guess what you could say is they are pitfalls which we've quite successfully avoided. So, 1, don't overcomplicate it. I said at the beginning, CPD 25 is in essence pretty simple. Keep it simple is probably the biggest piece of advice I could give. As I said, trying to ascertain and incorporate the needs of 58 separate institutions individually is just not possible. It would take years to get anything done. It would slow down the programme enormously, and I think you'd have a real risk of paralysis. You'd never get anything done. You'd end up being like the European Union. And as I said earlier, it does carry with it the associated risk that if you're not careful, you could end up pandering to the needs of a small group of institutions who are assertive in expressing their needs. And however unwittingly, you could end up prioritising them over everybody else. And you have to remember that it's 58 institutions, not a handful of big ones. Clear remits for the task groups. Now this is to help them maintain clearly distinct identities. And there's a very good practical reason for that. If you don't have clear remits, the groups can lose their sense of direction. And that results in events not being organised. Now this partly informs why we've gone from 5 task groups to 4. The 5th task group found itself having quite a few conflicts of ideas, clashes of ideas with the operations management task group. And it was leading to a degree of confusion. And as I said, the upshot of that was that events weren't being organised in some cases. We were heading for a state of paralysis in some areas of the programme. So what we've done is fold the 5th task group into the 4th and created a large group which now has that broader remit for operations management. Accreditation. I suppose it's tempting to consider the possibility of having courses run by CPD 25 to have them formally accredited by an external body. Now, to date, we have chosen not to go down this route, although it has been discussed in the past. Now, that's potentially because we could be subject to the full range of regulatory requirements that would be laid down by the UK's regulatory authorities, such as the UK's Quality Assurance Agency for Higher Education. Those requirements are significant and they are probably quite onerous. And we just don't have the resources to engage with that kind of process. So we steer clear of that at all costs, really. I would say do invest in good quality administrative support. Without the CPD 25 administrator, the organisation simply could not operate on the scale that it currently does. Relying on the task group members solely for everything, it just isn't feasible. The logistical support provided by the administrator really removes a huge burden from the task group members. But what it also does is that administrator role can also develop that kind of bird's eye view of the programme as it's being developed, and can pick up on potential clashes, potential problems, and report them back to either the steering group or me as the chair. So in that particular respect, the administrator's role is actually turned out to be crucial. You also absolutely need active, good quality task group members. After all, it's they who bring the ideas, the energy and the motivation to the programme. So it does mean that they have to be fully committed to playing a role within CPD 25. And that's partly why we have the job description. And the vast majority of task group members, I have to say, they are amazing. They engage fully in the life of the organisation. They appreciate it for the wonderful development opportunity it is for themselves. However, if a task group member is identified as not delivering on their agreed commitments, there isn't a formal performance management process to which a task group chair can resort in order to deal with the issue, because it's not an independent organisation. It doesn't have its own HR processes or anything like that. And it can present the CPD 25 chair and the individual task group chair involved with a bit of a challenge, because it's all voluntary, it's all operated on a voluntary basis. And you have to be sensitive to the fact that, particularly in the UK at the moment, task group members will be juggling the demands of a day job, which may well be increasing day upon day upon day and getting more and more difficult. So the amount of time that a task group member can realistically devote to CPD 25 activities could be reducing significantly. Nevertheless, the responsibility towards delivering the programme remains very real. And the group chairs fundamentally have to put the interests of CPD 25 first. I mean, there's just no choice there. So that's why we have the job description, and we can refer back to that in discussions with the task group member concerned. And I should probably say also that when we had the recent task group reorganisation, when we went from 5 to 4, we took that as an opportunity to give members the chance to either continue with CPD 25 or bow out. And some people did choose that latter option. So we're left with what I hope is a refreshed and a rejuvenated organisation. Collaboration. If you were approached by an external party to collaborate in some way, my advice would be to think quite carefully about that. In the past, and I guess this is one of the areas where CPD 25 has strayed very close to making a mistake. In the past, it entered into an agreement with an external organisation to provide administrative support for the delivery of their training programme. This happened to be a network of IT professionals in the London area. Now, ultimately, the arrangement was abandoned for a variety of reasons. But what it did kind of highlight is that it did highlight the need to have in place something like an official service level agreement, so everyone was clear about what each party could expect. And because that wasn't in place, things did start to fall apart a bit, and in the end the agreement was abandoned and both parties went their own separate ways. So, in conclusion, I think CPD 25's longevity and the sheer number of events it's now delivered something like, over its 10-year cycle, 600 or 700 events. You can only really say it's been a success story. And whilst you could say that there are many reasons for the success, it comes back to this idea of it being simple, really. It's fundamentally about this idea of simplicity. This combination of committed volunteers and really solid administrative support is a potent combination which I would recommend to any of the consortium that's embarking upon a similar venture. And if that wasn't enough, you can even find romance through CPD 25. I met my wife through it. This is us in the Lake District of North West England at Christmas a couple of years ago. It was about -10 and this photograph was actually taken by someone fell running in shorts and a t-shirt. It was astonishing. We looked like we were ready for the North Pole. Right, I realise that it is simple and it does make it brief, but I am very happy to take questions now or for people to save them for the Q&A later. Thank you.